Israel and the presidential elections. It's interesting that Jews, for many years now, tend to vote Democrat. So 1992, Clinton versus George H.W. Bush, that was 80% Democrat, 11% Republican. 1996, Clinton-Dole, 78 to 16%. Bush-Gore, so George W. Bush, Al Gore, 79% voted for Gore, 19% for Bush. Bush-Kerry, 76% voted for Kerry, 24% for Bush. 2008, President Obama, John McCain, 78 to 22. And then Obama-Romney, 69% to 30. So Romney got more Jewish vote than normal, but still overwhelmingly Jews vote Democratic and have for some years. Not quite as high as African Americans, but overwhelmingly so. The question is why? Just a broader question. I'm often asked that question because it doesn't always make sense to friends of mine. A lot of the Christian friends I have that are strongly pro-Israel, they're Republican, and they can't understand why Jews vote so overwhelmingly democratically. One reason is that the vast majority of American Jews are not Orthodox. They're not religious. They're more secular. They're more humanistic in their approach to things. They're more liberal in their values, and therefore they would side with a lot of the Democratic positions. And there is this sense of prophetic stance for social justice that, to me, gets on the wrong side of key issues, gets on the wrong side of abortion and other key issues, but it's kind of this ethic, like this is where we're standing on the front lines of social change and social justice and things like that, and many Jews identify with that. And then also, there is a Jewish fear of what would be perceived as right-wing totalitarian religion. The fear that there would be some type of Christian takeover and that Christian values would be forced on people or whatever it is, because obviously in quote Christian or professedly Christian-dominated countries through the centuries, Jews have not done that well. And often we end up as the odd man out. So these are some of the reasons why Jews have largely voted for the Democrat Party versus the Republican Party. My dad was an active member in the Democrat Party, and his brothers were staunch Democrats, and my cousins remain that to this day. I'm kind of the odd man out, that I haven't been enthusiastically Democrat, although I'm a registered independent. I don't personally feel to put allegiance with either party. But it is interesting to look at the history. However, if you notice that drop, about a 10% shift from President Obama's running the first time versus the second time, there was a recognition of challenging relationships between Barack Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu. That's been recognized, and in fact, some real times of tension. And the average Israeli thinks that George Bush was a much better friend of Israel than Barack Obama. And if you just talk to the man on the street in Israel, that's the impression you'll get. And that seems to be some of the reason for the shift that Romney got 10% more of the vote than 8 years earlier. But let's look at the candidates now and where they stand with regard to Israel. And then at the end, I want to bring in some scripture and a biblical perspective. November 2015, online article in newspapers, Hillary in Israel, how I would reaffirm unbreakable bond with Israel, and Benjamin Netanyahu. So Hillary Clinton outspokenly saying she would reaffirm, quote, the unbreakable bond with Israel and with Benjamin Netanyahu. And there are many Jews who think that she is pragmatic and experienced and feel comfortable with her and are absolutely petrified of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has even been accused of being an anti-Semite for, I don't know if you followed the controversy, but he retweeted something about Hillary Clinton and money, and it had what he didn't think it was a Jewish star. He just thought it was a star and it was some other image. But someone saying, oh no, it was anti-Semitic and it was implying Jews and money. Is Donald Trump anti-Semitic? That's a tough charge to bring. My friend Rabbi Shmuley outspokenly says he's absolutely not an anti-Semite, And if you just think about it practically and pragmatically for a moment, his daughter Ivanka converted to Judaism, didn't just marry a Jewish man, converted to Judaism, which means his grandchildren are Jewish. And I was not aware of this, but all of his adult children are either married to Jews or dating Jews. So generally speaking, if you grow up in an anti-Semitic home, and if you're an anti-Semite, that would not be the case with your family, nor would you be embracing of them. So whatever issues or questions people have about Donald Trump, the anti-Semitic charge to me rings hollow. When we look back at the last few years and the strained relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu, there have been some things that took place that were really considered diplomatic snubbing with President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Most noticeably, when they were meeting together, having a private meeting, and it was not going the way the president wanted it to go, that he got up and left the meeting, had to go be with his family, and left Prime Minister Netanyahu sitting there. And then others were saying, and he was escorted out this door, and it's the wrong door. I don't know all the diplomatic stuff, but it was really taken as a direct snub. And then, of course, with Benjamin Netanyahu coming here and speaking to Congress, then that was considered meddling. And so the relationship has been anything but good. On the one hand, President Obama reaffirming, standing with Israel, and friendship with Israel. On the other hand, real tenuous relationships between Barack Obama, Benjamin Netanyahu, and that question of how solid is the commitment and how solid is the relationship. Let's, though, get to where the candidates today weigh in on things that are relevant concerning Israel. And again, we're not saying that this is the one thing by which you determine where you vote. I mean, for me, I have a real simple grid. You may affirm it, you may reject it, but I have a real simple grid. Before I'm going to vote for anyone, I always look at three issues that are really important. Where they stand on life, so abortion and related issues, where they stand on marriage, the definition of family, and where they stand on Israel. And if they're bad on those, I don't care how strong they are on the others, I'm not going to vote for them. Just me personally. I'm not telling you should follow that. And then if they check those off, then I want to look, okay, what about other areas? And would they be good with security, or would they be good with economy, or whatever? But that's where I'm always going to start, and those things are foundational to me. And if I see a candidate that's, say, radical pro-abortion, and deeply in bed with Planned Parenthood, I can't vote for them. To me, it's being complicit in the shedding of innocent blood. Can't vote for them in conscience. Again, everyone has certain lines they draw. I'm sure in the days of slavery in America that there were enough people said, okay, no matter how good a candidate you are and how strong you are on this, if you're pro-slavery, I can't vote for you. Even if you're going to help the economy and help our national security or help with this or help, sorry, I can't do it. So Israel, again, for me, is a massively important issue, and I'll explain why at the end. But obviously, this is just information I'm giving you, and you sort these things out for yourselves. So what has the past administration done that ties in with the incoming administration? Well, the Iran deal. The deal that was made with Iran over against massive protests from Israel, and not only from Israel, even from countries like Saudi Arabia. Because remember, Saudi Arabia is a Sunni Muslim country, Iran, Shiites, and they are at war. There are warring factions between Sunni and Shia in Syria, warring factions of Sunni and Shia in Yemen, and both largely funded by these opposing groups within Islam. And as much as the persecution of Christians in the Middle East is absolutely horrific, mind-boggling, and terrible, decimating populations and driving people into exile, the highest number of casualties of people dying are Muslims being killed by other Muslims. So countries like Saudi Arabia, they were not happy with the Iran deal because they don't want Iran to get nuclear weapons. And they felt this is a path for them to get them in 10 years. And then the fact that Iran would end up getting billions of dollars, not just the money that was recently paid out, and critics are saying that was a payment for release of hostages and prisoners there, but Iran stands to get tens of billions of dollars, and they have made plain the money will go where it's always gone. In other words, yes, we want to rebuild our economy, etc., but we still are going to sponsor Hamas or these other groups or Hezbollah or whoever it is. When you see casualties in Iraq and Americans getting killed, a lot of that is funded by Iran. So where does Donald Trump stand on this? Well, if Trump's known for anything, he's known as a deal maker in his book, The Art of the Deal. So in his words that he's repeated over and over, it's the worst deal he's ever seen. Remember, Senator Cruz had said in one of the first debates that the first thing he would do would be tear it up. And again, what power the president would have, approval, that's a whole other story. But Trump has been outspokenly critical of the Iran deal. And although you might say, okay, will he really stay with a position? Can we trust his real position? Do we know who he really is? There's certain things he's been steady on from the start, and I don't see any reason why he would want to change his position on this, any advantage to it. So he has been strongly outspoken against it. Interestingly, New York Times reported September of last year, after Hillary Clinton spoke at the Brookings Institute, that, quote, she backs the deal with caveats. Exact quote from her: "Diplomacy is not the pursuit of perfection, it is the balancing of risk." Diplomacy is not the pursuit of perfection, it is the balancing of risk. And her speech at Brookings was taken to be a strong endorsement of the Iran deal, but with caveats in terms of just oversight in the region or continuing to monitor things with regard to terror. And remember the deal as it's set up, that if there's going to be an inspection of the Iranian nuclear facilities, what do they have, 30 days notice? I mean, picture that. You tell some drug dealers, we're going to check your place out in 30 days. I mean, a lot of them, 30 minutes, they're good, right? 24 hours, they have the whole place looking like a, flower shop. 30 days. So critics have raised serious concerns about this. And again, I'm on the side of the critics, so maybe I'm not looking at it in a balanced way, but I have grave concerns about the deal and grave concerns about all the money, all the frozen money that's going back into their hands, knowing that it's going to fund terrorism. And John Kerry has admitted to that being the case, that this will happen. So that is a big red flag to me. And look, it's one thing to think about Israel's well-being, as much as we love Israel and care for Israel. It's another thing to say, okay, is there a real possibility of Iran going nuclear? And what about some Iranian Islamic end-time beliefs that are expecting somewhat of an apocalypse? One journalist did an in-depth study of ISIS and found that one of their core beliefs was that they're going to grow and then they're going to be defeated, and that's going to bring in the Islamic redemption, to oversimplify it. In other words, they are going to wreak all the havoc and damage they can, but ultimately with the mindset it's a losing effort. I even read that they want Trump to come in because that's going to be a better attack against them. I mean, it's kind of reverse logic. But if you think if Iran would actually go to war with Israel, normally self-preservation stops people from doing crazy things. Self-preservation stops you from blowing yourself up, no matter how hostile you are to someone. But if you have an ideology that gives some spiritual weight to that, that's terrifying. So Israel is dealing with this reality. And look, when you have Jerusalem Day once a year in Iran, and they're burning Israeli flags, and they're burning American flags, and they're chanting death to Israel, death to America, and we have some of our American leaders saying, well, they don't really mean that. Oh, they mean it metaphorically. Oh, they mean no, they mean death to America, death to Israel. So that is a subject of concern. What about the party platforms? Where do the Democrats and Republicans stand in terms of their party platforms? Now, look, I understand that you cannot guarantee that the president will carry out the ideals of the party platform. I understand that. And I understand that it may be the desire of the president to carry out, but Congress doesn't go along with it. I understand that. But still, for the most part, when you look at the Democrat Party platform and you look at the direction that President Obama has taken the country, let's just say you look at the issue of redefining marriage, embracing same-sex relations and things like that, that was clearly something that was on the agenda in recent years, and that was clearly something that was carried out in many ways to the best of his ability. So there are expectations. We can be fairly sure if Hillary Clinton was elected, what type of justices that she would appoint, that she would not appoint someone like Justice Scalia, for example, a staunch constitutionalist and conservative, whereas Donald Trump is on record saying he would have people like that and would look to groups like the Heritage Foundation, strong conservative think tanks to help. Now, whether, again, he would do it or not, only God knows. But assuming that the candidates would carry out what's in the party platform, what happens when we look at this? Well, the RNC platform was actually so conservative that it concerned some Jewish groups, because it omitted reference to a two-state solution. So there was a time when very few people were talking about a two-state solution, except maybe Palestinians, and Israeli leadership was hardly talking about it, and then Israeli leadership started to accept it more, and okay, we're going to have to go in this direction, and that would be reflected even in conservative Christian support. You know, we don't want to see the land divided, but fine, if this is the way it has to be, Israel just has to have secure borders, etc. Well, now it's gone even further, and it said, doesn't even mention two-state solution, and reaffirms again Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Now, on the one hand, that's just talk, because for years now, back to the days of Bill Clinton, back to the days of George Bush, there has been a mandate to relocate the American embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Because remember, Tel Aviv, the original capital, that's where all the embassies are. And then Israel changed it to Jerusalem, which has been, in that sense, the eternal capital of the nation and the people, and the place that, you know, next year in Jerusalem, in Jewish liturgy and prayer, longing to be back in the land in Jerusalem. So it was a logical thing to do, but obviously a political hot potato. So it's on the books that we're supposed to relocate the embassy. We've just never done it. I think it's every 6 months or something like that. Something's passed, okay, we'll delay it. So it's the same. I don't know that it would happen. Donald Trump says he would do it. Is it going to happen? I don't know. But if you remember 4 years ago, just reaffirming Jerusalem as Israel's capital drew a lot of dissension at the Democratic Convention. It actually got boos when it was being put forward. So what about the platform this year? Well, there's one gentleman who has been very staunch about having involvement with the platform and very committed to being a critic of Israel in certain ways, and it's the Jewish candidate, Bernie Sanders, who would really represent in many ways a very liberal American Jew, would be very typical in that regard, for better or for worse. So he was able to get various committee members to work on the platform. He wanted to have some influence after running his campaign and getting as many votes as he did. And that has really raised some concern in terms of some of the people who were involved in the DNC platform. So a report published May 23rd of this year by the Jewish Telegraph Agency said this: the Democratic Party platform drafting committee is top-heavy with veterans of political battles over Israel, some friendly, some critical, and including at least one major backer of the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So most of you are familiar with that, but for some who are not, you have, for example, some Christian or professing Christian denominations that have gotten involved in BDS, and they say, okay, all the money that we have invested in Israel and the companies we support in Israel, we're pulling our money out. We're going to boycott. We are going to not invest, but divest. And then some have even put out sanctions against Israel. And a lot of this is coming from a radical pro-Palestinian position. And please understand, You can be pro-Israel without backing everything Israel does. You can be pro-Israel and still take issue with justice. You can be pro-Israel and still advocate for Palestinians. It's not either or in that respect. But the BDS movement is so pro-Palestinian that it is radically anti-Israel, and in many cases blatantly anti-Semitic. So this is a concern. So 3 of the committee members selected by Bernard Sanders were Professor Cornel West, philosopher and professor, and social activist. You've seen him many times on TV. He's eloquent, he's passionate, strongly opinionated, good for TV, in other words, and a respected professor. James Zogby, the president of the Arab American Institute, and Representative Keith Ellison, Democrat from Minnesota, who's the first Muslim elected to Congress. And they are known in part, according to the article, for their criticisms of Israel. So these were people that Bernie Sanders specifically wanted to be on the committee drafting the language for the Democratic platform. So just that tells you that within the Democratic Party, there is much more diversity in terms of views for Israel. And even though Jews are heavily voting democratically for decades now, the fact is that the Democratic Party has not been as strongly pro-Israel as the Republican Party has, interestingly. And that also reflects when Jewish voters in America are asked what their top priorities are compared to Christian voters. Many times evangelical Christians put standing with Israel higher than American Jews. And some would criticize them and say it's just blind support and it's naive support. You just think it's fulfilling prophecy. And others would say, no, it's out of a real solidarity and commitment. So Cornel West, according to the article, a prominent BDS backer, and Zogby has spoken forcefully against attempts to marginalize the movement. In other words, do not marginalize BDS. There are some states in America now that are outlawing. You cannot, we are not going to participate with BDS movements in our state. So Zogby spoken forcefully against attempts to marginalize that. But again, Cornel West, according to the article, a fiery speaker who has called the Gaza Strip the hood on steroids, and in 2014 wrote that the crimes of Hamas, quote, pale in the face of the U.S.-supported Israeli slaughters of innocent civilians. Now, remember that when Bernie Sanders was being interviewed, it was by the New York Post, and he was raising some issues and concerns about Israel's last war with Hamas in Gaza. And he couldn't quite remember the figures, but he thought it was somewhere around 10,000 civilians that were killed by the Israelis. Now, in point of fact, the nature of the war and the way it's waged, and when investigation was done subsequently, it indicated that the ratio of civilians killed compared to armed combatants was about the lowest in recorded warfare. And that Israel certainly has its flaws and its biases and its racist attitudes like any other group or people. It's not beyond that. And there's certainly things that are done wrong where there is Arab hatred or Palestinian hatred. I'm not denying that. But if you talk to anyone that served in the Israeli army, they'll tell you all the hoops they have to jump through to protect the lives of innocent civilians and innocent combatants. And when they first have their training, it begins with ethics training. In fact, as one young Israeli serving in the IDF told me when I was in Israel the last time, or time before last, he showed me the ethics card, and he said, this is a card that lays out our ethical responsibilities. He said, we are not allowed to leave base. We cannot leave without our ID, our photo ID, and this card. We have to carry it at all times. And I've had parents whose kids were serving in the army tell me, pray, when they were going into Lebanon years ago or going into Gaza, they said it is even all the more dangerous because they have to have all these precautions because people are often used as human shields. So not only was Bernie Sanders' figure completely off the wall, I mean, it was way, way, way beyond the pale of what happened. But as statistics are being reported about casualties, we rely on UN statistics, and UN relies on Hamas statistics. And as people began to analyze them, liberal papers like New York Times and others began to analyze them, they noticed that there was a disproportionate number of so-called civilians who were killed who were males between 18 and, say, 30 years old. And if it was just an equal distribution, you would have expected to see just as many women, just as many small children, etc., but that's not what happened. So fascinating to see that. And here Bernie Sanders in his criticism, it's not to say you could level no criticism, but to say the criticism he leveled was completely off base and not based on facts and reality. So here he has influence then into the party platform. Just one more word about Cornel West, and then I'll talk about why this should matter to us biblically. Interestingly, Cornel West was going to be speaking at a tribute to Abraham Joshua Heschel, the great Jewish Theological Seminary professor, philosopher, Jewish thinker, one of the most influential and loved Jewish thinkers of the 20th century. And there was a memorial gathering that was being held. And Cornel West, because of whatever history he had, and if you go back in the civil rights movement, famous pictures of Martin Luther King and Abraham Joshua Heschel walking side by side, and great Jewish solidarity with the civil rights movement, and Cornel West being an influential African-American civil rights activist in that regard. So whatever reason he was chosen to speak, Judea Pearl, who is the Chancellor's Professor of Computer Science and Statistics at UCLA and president of the Daniel Pearl Foundation, remember Daniel Pearl killed by Muslim terrorists, she urged West to excuse himself from delivering a commemorative lecture at UCLA in memory of Abraham Joshua Heschel. So she pointed to West's support of the BDS movement rightly condemned for its militant anti-Israel bias, and she also pointed to an August 12, 2014 interview with Sean Hannity in which West, quote, could not find even one historical link between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. As she says, none, nada, blank. Not one word of empathy for a multi-ethnic society of immigrants who fought 67 years of besiegement and hostility. None, nada, blank. So suffice it to say that the positions of a Cornel West or a Keith Ellison or a James Zogby are positions that would be completely foreign to the Republican platform and completely foreign to Donald Trump's approach. Now, think about Donald Trump one more moment. It is true that on MSNBC, he said when he was pressed what his position would be on Israel and the Palestinians, he said, I want to remain neutral. And he said he wanted to remain neutral so it wouldn't be perceived he was taking sides because he's a negotiator. He wants to be able to come in and negotiate, although his people tell him this is one of the toughest deals to make. Yeah, I'm sure you needed specialists to tell you that. And then, less than 1 week later, he was speaking at Regent University. And Pat Robertson's, the school he founded, and staunch evangelical, staunch supporters of Israel, and he pledged his absolute support for Israel. Now, of course, MSNBC, more liberal audience, he said something that was more politically correct there, and Regent, something that was more politically correct there. But since his one statement on MSNBC, he's been consistently strong in terms of a pro-Israel stance. And I happen to have Christian friends, leaders who've met with him and spent considerable time with him, and he seems to have been pretty unwavering in terms of his desire to be a friend of Israel. Again, that doesn't mean an enemy of the Palestinians, but it means standing with Israel as an ally. So the sentiments behind the party platform of the Democrats, very different than some of the sentiments behind the party platform of the Republicans. And just weighing it in terms of if you had to ask which party platform is more pro-Israel, more friendly to Israel, it is overwhelmingly Republican. And there's really not a surprise with that. And as far as the candidates, although Hillary Clinton has not been known as an enemy of Israel, and who knows what monies have been given if you want all kinds of conspiratorial theories and looking for Arab money, given to the Clinton Foundation, you can go that way. I'm just saying, outwardly, she's never been looked at as an enemy of Israel, but the fact that she could largely affirm the Iran deal and then be at home with the Democratic Party platform does raise concerns. So if that was my only factor, and I was voting based on that, where a candidate stood on Israel, if I was a one-issue person, I would have to vote Republican. I would have to vote Donald Trump. And you might say, well, what about this? Fine, I'm not addressing all of that. And we can have, if in the Q&A, we can stir up more controversy. If I didn't stir up enough controversy, if I'm being too balanced and polite, you can stir up more controversy in the Q&A. But listen, enough controversy comes my way on a daily basis. I don't need to try to stir it up, just to mention that. But if I give you biblical reasons why we should stand for Israel, the question would be, well, who cares? Your average American voter could say, why do I care? Look, economy, that affects everybody. Good economy, bad economy, that affects everybody. Our immigration policies, our security policies, that kind of affects everybody. If there's a president that helps with the education system or hurts the education system, that affects everybody. But why should we care about what the Bible says when it comes to Israel? Isn't that like a theocracy and we're trying to take over and impose our religious views on everyone? No, my proposal is simply this, that Israel still matters in God's sight, that America's relationship with Israel still matters in God's sight, and that there are positive and negative consequences for standing for or standing against Israel. So in other words, what God is telling us in the scriptures is true, and we should therefore consider it. So many Christians have this notion that, quote, if you bless Israel, you'll be blessed. And if you curse Israel, you'll be cursed. There are Christians who say, look at the British Empire. Look at how great and powerful and widespread it was. And when it began to act unjustly towards the fledgling state of Israel, and in its pioneering days, that it went down, down, down after that. There are some who make that argument. I'm friends with a pastor of one of the fastest growing churches in America. From early on, they have had supernatural favor on their finances. When they were 4 years old as a church ministry, they built a new building that cost them $14 million. And during the building process, they told the people, stop giving, we have all the money we need. And they don't even receive offerings. People just put money in boxes in the back like you would in a synagogue. And as of 2 years ago, the last time I got data on this, and the church is maybe 15 years old now, they give away to missions work around the world, missions, humanitarian work, more than $1 million a month. If you ask the pastor, what is the key to your financial success? Now, they're in a wealthy area, Grapevine, Texas. They have a lot of wealthy people coming, but there are plenty of churches in wealthy areas that have wealthy people coming. When asked the secret, what's the key, he says, we stand with Israel. He said, that is why we are so supernaturally blessed financially. And the first monies that come in every month, the first check they write to give away to missions. But the first check they write of the missions check is to help Israel and to help Jewish ministry in Israel. I spoke each of the last 2 years at the largest church in Europe, largest Protestant church in Europe, 70,000 members, faith church. The pastor started the church under communism and was persecuted, was not allowed to leave the country. And of course, communism fell there in Hungary. And the church continues to grow. They have a European Union accredited seminary with 600 students. They have about 5,000 students in day schools throughout Hungary. And it's an extraordinary place. The main building seats about 12,000 people, and they'll pack it out multiple times over the weekend. And among other speakers who've spoken from the same pulpit I spoke, there are men like Elie Wiesel. They have an incredible relationship with Israel. They've had Israeli ambassadors and other leaders come and speak for them. They are some of the best friends Israel has anywhere in the world. They advocate for Israel in the government there and with the prime minister. They're recognized by the government of Israel. The leader is there because of his strong stance. And I asked him, do you think there's any connection between your standing with Israel and the supernatural blessing on your church to have 70,000 members? He said, integrally connected, totally integrally connected. Last year, my 23rd trip to India, I spoke at the fastest growing church in the world. 10 years ago, they had 35 members. Today, they have 120,000 members. The building is a phenomenon itself. It seats 19,000 people. The men sit on one side, the women sit on the other. They have 5 Sunday services, starting at 6 a.m. and ending at 8 p.m. And then they have an overflow for extra people. They average 5,000 new visitors a week. And I attended one of the services and greeted the people, spoke to them briefly. And they're in the city of Hyderabad in India. And I talked to them about a highway from Hyderabad to Jerusalem and back. I just felt that there were going to be deepening relations there. Well, the day before, I'd met with the pastor and sat in his office with him, and he has 2 flags on his desk, interestingly enough, an Indian flag and an Israeli flag. And when you walk into the building, you are greeted with the word shalom. And somehow they have this connection in their hearts with Israel. Now, I'm not saying this is some magic stone that you rub, okay? Or it's just utilitarian. You want to get rich, find a Jew, and rub the Jew on the head. No, I mean, please don't take me the wrong way. I'm saying that it seems that God sometimes goes out of his way to say, yes, standing with my ancient people is a good thing, whether they're doing well or they're doing poorly, whether Israel is at its best or Israel is at its worst. Many Christians have kind of a sentimental love for Israel, and they don't realize that although Israel excels in so many ways ethically and does so many good and right things, Israel is flawed like everybody else. Israel has its drug problems and its sex exploitation problems and its other issues and its tensions within society and worldliness and carnality. It's human beings. So Christians are not standing with Israel because Israel's perfect, but because of a commitment on God's behalf. So Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 and 3, God calls Abram out of Ur of the Chaldees and says, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed, or all the families of the earth will bless themselves by you. The question is, can that in any way be applied to Israel today? Is there any right connection between that? Because if so, then that would matter to us as a nation. If so, that would matter. When God said through the prophet Zechariah in the first chapter, whoever touches Israel touches the apple of my eye, does that apply to this day? You say that was Israel back then. Hey, but that was Israel in sin. The Jewish people exiled into Assyria, exiled into Babylon. Why? Because of our sin, a repeated theme of the prophets, our sin, our guilt, our wickedness. And yet, God judged the nations that hurt Israel. That went, some would translate the Hebrew, they overdid the punishment. God wanted to judge them, but these foreign nations went even too far, and God said, whoever touches Israel touches the apple of my eye. I sent them to you for discipline, but you overdid it, and you're going to pay for it. And what happened to the great Assyrian Empire and the great Babylonian Empire? The nations that mistreated Israel, the empires, they're gone. They're gone. Is that a message that still applies to today? Well, the message of God blessing Abram and giving him the land of Israel, that's reaffirmed in Genesis 18:18, and then in Genesis 22:17 and 18. And then, interestingly, in Genesis chapter 27, verse 29, Isaac blesses Jacob and uses the same words over him. Those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you will be cursed. So it's passed down from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. And then, think of this now. Here's the nation of Israel as a whole. They've come out of Egypt. They're sinning and rebelling in the wilderness. Their destiny is to wander and die in the wilderness, all those 20 years old and over. So it's not exactly that they have been perfectly righteous, right? And Balak, the king of Moab, hires Balaam to curse Israel. And God says, don't curse them because they're blessed. But hang on. They haven't done too well in the wilderness. They've sinned. Their bodies are dropping like flies. In this desert, your bodies will fall. Numbers 14:29. I mean, this is what's going to happen. And yet, God said, they're blessed. You don't mess with them. You don't curse them. And Balaam, who's hired to curse Israel, in Numbers 24:9 says this of the nation as a whole, blessed are those who bless you, and cursed are those who curse you. As I understand it, that still holds to this day. Yes, God has disciplined our people in love. Yes, we have been chastised. Yes, we have suffered. But God has kept his promise to preserve us. You know, the old story of a king who asked for a proof of the existence of God in one word, and the reply from one of the men in his court was, that one word is easy: the Jew. How else do you explain our scattering in the nations and yet maintaining our peoplehood? No nation has been scattered from its homeland for many generations and maintained its distinct identity without assimilating into the nations around it, and then being regathered to the land as the prophets foretold, and not because of our righteousness. Who were some of the founders of the modern state of Israel? Atheists, communists. The Orthodox rabbis, by and large, at the time of the founding of Israel, in the days of Theodore Herzl and others, they were against the movement. They saw this as going to be a secular state. They said this would be the worst thing for there to be a secular state. It's going to increase hostility against the Jewish people around the world. So we have not been built up as a nation again because of our righteousness, but because of God's grace and goodness, as was prophesied with regard to the Babylonian exile, and I believe the final return. That God said, I'm not doing it because of your righteousness, but for my name's sake. That would tell me to this day that if we treat Israel unjustly, God will not be pleased with that. Yes, justice is important, period. Proverbs 14:34 says, righteousness exalts a nation, any nation. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people, any people. Whether you believe in God or not, if you follow godly principles, that'll bring blessing. If you follow ungodly principles, that'll bring destruction. You just live by the wisdom of Proverbs, even if you don't believe there's a God, you'll do better than the person who doesn't live by that. But yet it seems there's something about Israel, because Israel is uniquely hated by the world. I've done talks many years back at Yale and Columbia, and then in some other settings, about the diabolical nature of anti-Semitism. And I've just reviewed things and said, think about it. Anti-Semitism is the longest hatred in human history, as pointed out by the Catholic scholar Edward Flannery. If you think of that for a moment, the longest hatred in human history, it goes back to the Greco-Roman era or Greek literature, a good 300 years before the time of Jesus. The longest lasting hatred, still virulent and hot to this day. The most widespread, you find it through much of Christian history. You find it in Islam. You find it in atheist regimes like under Stalin. You find it in whatever way you want to describe the Nazis under Hitler. You can read books written when times are tough in Japan and the economy's bad, and you'll read books blaming the tough economy on Jews, on Israel. It's the most widespread. It's the most irrational. Jews have been blamed for everything. I've read Jews being blamed for the spread of AIDS. 9/11 is coming tomorrow. Some of you here touched directly by it. My wife's brother killed that day. And there are people who believe to this moment it was all done by Israel. It was all a Mossad operation. I've had more than a few taxi drivers tell me that in New York. The widespread nature of Jew hatred, the irrational nature of it. You know, during the Black Plague in medieval Europe, when as many as 1/3 of the people died in different cities and locations, not quite as many Jews died, probably primarily because of hygiene and Jewish law and things like that. So who gets blamed? The Jews. It's the evil Jews. And they were accused of poisoning the wells with a mixture of like hearts of monkeys and the elements of communion and stuff like that. And they poisoned the wells. In fact, they died too. That didn't matter. It's the most irrational hatred. I mean, according to Hamas charter, the Masons are controlled by Jews. There's a movement called the Raelians, founded by Rael, a Frenchman who claimed to be abducted by aliens. And he's got a wide following. You go to the website, it's multiple languages. And I went there one time to check it out, and he had just given a speech, and it was an anti-Semitic speech. Even the aliens are anti-Semitic. So what I'm saying is and when you try to trace it out, blame it all on Christianity, blame it all on Islam, blame it all on economy, blame it all on scapegoat, you can't connect all the dots. You can't connect all the dots. There's something diabolical, there's something supernatural about Jew hatred, and therefore it's important for us to stand against it. Because you can be critical of Israel without being an anti-Semite. Of course you can. But many times, hiding behind the veil of anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. That's what Martin Luther King himself said. So I believe it's important that America shows solidarity with Israel because there is a supernatural opposition to Israel. At a forum I was at with Henry Kissinger, Dan Rather, and Fuad Ajami in 1991, Fuad Ajami, Johns Hopkins Middle Eastern scholar from Lebanon, he made the comment that Saddam Hussein uses nerve gas and no one says a word. Israel uses tear gas and there's a UN resolution passed against them. The imbalance in the reporting, the imbalance, just look at UN history of resolutions and bashing Israel, and then compare that to, was there a UN resolution, security resolution, when Saddam Hussein gassed tens of thousands of Kurds? No. Tiananmen Square? No. You used to go down the list. So it's important that America stands to balance these things. You take America's standing with Israel out of the Security Council, Israel will get condemned over and over and over again. And then just on a pragmatic level, it is the very best friend that we have. Democratic country, republic, democracy, anywhere in the Middle East, Israel, our number one friend and ally, and standing shoulder to shoulder, standing against radical Islam. And we saw that 9/11. One reason that we're attacked is our solidarity with Israel. America's called the great Satan, Israel's called the little Satan. So I believe that pragmatically, where America stands on Israel is important. And I do have concerns about the direction the last administration has gone, and based on the platform where it could continue to go, if it continued as it's been, and hope that a Republican platform would have a different, stronger stand with Israel. But again, that's just one issue to factor in, and that's all I was asked to analyze and talk about.